So Loki ended, and I have to say, I didn't really love the show. To me, it felt like knockoff Doctor Who, knockoff Umbrella Academy, and at the end of the day, I just didn't feel like the show was really about Loki. It's definitely my least favorite of the MCU shows. Like, to me, it's not terrible, it's just a thing I personally didn't love. Like, if you watched Loki and loved it, I'm glad. Like, I'm glad it was able to affect you and hit you in some way. To me, it just didn't really do that. Like, aside from maybe the early conversations between Loki and Mobius and the scene where Loki sees his whole life play before his eyes and then he sees his death, and then he has a little talk with Mobius where he talks about how he feels so insignificant, like, compared to, Thor, and feel like he's always in the shadow of other people. Like, that stuff to me is great, and that's when I was invested, I was hooked. But then the rest of the series played out, and I just didn't care for what I was seeing. Like, the show as a whole felt like it was trying to be Doctor Who, but not like the great seasons of Doctor Who with David Tennant and Christopher Eccleston. It felt like the very later Matt Smith era, and it just didn't really gel with me. I didn't like how the show was presenting all of its ideas. Especially the TVA. Like, the TVA to me felt like a ripoff of the Time Bureau from Umbrella Academy. Now, I know obviously that Umbrella Academy is a property that was inspired by Marvel and DC Comics, and obviously the TVA existed for longer. It's just that the way it was presented on film, TV, whatever, I felt like Umbrella Academy just did a much more interesting and engaging job. The whole design and the way the TVA worked, I just didn't care for. It was all just stuff I'd seen in a much better TV show with much more engaging characters. Like, even this time around, Tom Hiddleston's Loki doesn't feel like Loki. I don't know if it was due to his performance or the way he was directed, but just something was off about him. I don't know, maybe it's because he wasn't no longer in a medieval fantasy situation. Like, he didn't feel like big, grandiose, I am Loki of Asgard, burdened with glorious purpose. I didn't buy that from him. He just felt like, oh, I'm Loki, I'm just here along for the ride. And when he meets Sylvie, he sort of just goes along with what she says. Like, it's more of like a, oh, we're going to take down the TVA, but there isn't really an urgency on Loki's behalf. It's more of Sylvie's goal to kill the Timekeepers. And Sylvie herself was a character that I didn't get invested in because I didn't know that much about her. She was a variant of Loki that I'm assuming was a variant because she was born a girl or something. And then the TVA kidnaps her, and then she wants to destroy the TVA or something. Like, if the show wanted me to be invested in her, I just wasn't, because it didn't give me enough for me to latch onto. And then the relationship between Loki and Sylvie itself was weird, because it was like he fell in love with a version of himself. Like, it was an interesting idea, it's just that nothing really comes of it other than they kiss at the end. And now that I'm on it, the show says that Loki is bisexual, and that's not a problem. It just feels like another one of Disney's forced tokenism moments, because at this moment in time, I was like, okay, we haven't seen Loki in the past MCU films ever be attracted to male characters. If anything, if you look at Thor the Dark World and you see his reaction to when he turns Thor into Lady Sif, it seems more like it's implying that he's in love with Lady Sif rather than, him being gay or bisexual. And it's not like I have a problem with Loki being bisexual, I just have a problem with the way the show decided to present it, because his love interest in this show is a female version of himself. What I mean is that in context of the Loki show and the Loki that we've seen in the MCU, them randomly throwing in a line saying that he's bisexual is completely pointless, because the show doesn't go out of its way to show Loki with another male partner. They just have him fall in love with a female version of himself, but never him go after or chat up another man or anything like that. It's just, it seems forced and tokenistic. Now, the overall structure and pacing of the story to me was very weak. I just didn't care. I felt like each episode didn't get enough done. Like, to me, there wasn't really a standout episode. Like, I'd probably say my favorite was episode 1, just because of the character stuff with Loki and Mobius, and I love elements of episode 5, like Richard E. Grant as old Loki was fantastic. I want a spin-off show out of continuity with the MCU and just have Richard E. Grant as a version of Loki, like a little mini-series of him just causing mischief and mayhem across the Marvel Universe. Like, I want that so badly, like, it's so perfect. Like, when he conjures up Asgard and he's, like, cackling maniacally and he's like, glorious purpose, I'm like, this is fantastic, I need more of this is beautiful. And then you get to the finale, which was just really underwhelming, because it's just a massive conversation between Loki, Sylvie, and Kang the Conqueror. Now, the episode isn't boring because it's a big conversation, it just felt anticlimactic. Like, the show has great moments of conversation, like, every scene between Loki and Mobius is gold, but the way the finale presents this big conversation between Loki, Sylvie, and Kang, it just felt like I was being fed a bunch of exposition, and then all of a sudden, Sylvie kills Kang, and then pushes Loki through a portal, and then Loki ends up in a timeline where Mobius doesn't know he exists, and that's sort of it. The multiverse, like, spirals out and is out of control. If anything, I felt like I was just watching a bunch of setup for Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness. It didn't end with an overall satisfying season-long arc for Loki, it just ended up back in a timeline where Mobius didn't know he existed. Like, that's not real character development. And then Jonathan Majors as Kang, or He Who Must Not Be Named, or He Who Has No Name, or whatever, like, I didn't really care for his portrayal of Kang the Conqueror. Like, if this is Marvel going, here's your next villain for the next phase of Marvel films, I was like, okay, he's not very threatening. Now, don't take this as me saying I'm a big aficionado of Kang the Conqueror. Like, I'm really not. Like, I've barely been exposed to the character in the comics. Like, my only real exposure to the character is in Avengers Earth Mightiest Hero, where he's just this guy in a time chair that can, like, easily beat, the Avengers, and he's, like, trying to kill Captain America and all that. But it's like, the way Kang is presented in the show just felt really lazy. Like, they didn't bother dressing up Jonathan Majors in a Kang the Conqueror looking suit. Like, apparently Kang's blue face in the comics isn't actually his face, it's a mask. But it's like, they didn't even bother giving him a mask, they just put him in purple robes, and he just felt like Willy Wonka. Speaking of which, Jonathan Majors would be an amazing Willy Wonka. Like, he was giving really great Willy Wonka energy, I enjoyed that. But in terms of Marvel going, here's your next big villain for the next phase of Marvel films, I was like, okay, I don't see it. He's not very menacing, he's not very... I don't care. Like, I know the show said he's like a variant of like multiple billions of variants or whatever, but it's like, even when we see that big statue of Kang at the end and Loki looks at the TVA statue and it's of Kang, he doesn't look like comic book Kang. I'm just like, okay, why should I care? Like, if anything, he didn't really pose much of a big threat to Loki and Sylvie. He just wanted them to kill him so the multiverse could go out of chaos or something. Like, I don't know what Kang's end goal was in Loki. Like, he just seemed like a villain to tack on because we needed a big villain at the end. But even then, there's no fight. The ending of the show is just really underwhelming. Like, the best way to describe Loki is that it's a really underwhelming show. Like, if you told me like 5, 6, 7 years ago that there's going to be a Loki show, I would have been like, oh great, we're going to see this version of Loki from like Thor the Dark World and Avengers. We're going to see him wrought mischief and chaos across the cosmos. Like, that's going to be awesome. But then if you also told me, no, it's just going to be like knockoff Doctor Who that doesn't really have a satisfying ending, I'd be like, oh, okay. Why? Like, when I think about it, when it comes to, like, the Thor characters, Marvel really just doesn't know what to do with them. Like, they don't want to seem to lean into the Norse mythology fantasy side to it. They instead just want to sort of change it into Guardians of the Galaxy, like what they did with Thor Ragnarok, and I don't like Thor Ragnarok because it just went, oh, all this, like, cool epic fantasy stuff, get rid of that, stupid improv jokes, I don't like Thor Ragnarok. Like, it's so dumb, and I don't understand people's love for it. Like, I'm glad people enjoy it, but I just don't see the appeal at all. And I find that just so weird, because the thing that makes the Thor side of the Marvel Universe so great is that it does lean into that Lord of the Rings, Game of Thrones epic fantasy stuff. Like in Kenneth Branagh's first Thor film, when like Odin's casting Thor out of Asgard, it's beautiful. A lot of the Asgardian stuff in the first Thor film is fantastic. And then there's elements of Thor the Dark World that work really well because the director Alan Taylor did a lot of work on Game of Thrones. Granted, he did also do the episode Beyond the Wall in season 7, which is a bad episode, but it's like enjoyably bad because of how dumb it is, but regardless of that, it doesn't really matter. And then you get to Loki's sacrifice in Avengers Infinity War, and he's all just like, I am Loki, Odin's son, and like the music starts swelling. Like that grandiose epicness that you would get from a fantasy thing is there in the Thor films, but Marvel never fully goes into it and tells an epic fantasy story. They're just like, whatever, we'll just make it more earthbound and science-based. Like, no, the thing that makes Thor magical is that he is a fantasy based character. Like, stop trying to make magic science. No, make magic magic. And that's what I think is a major detriment to the Loki show, is that they turned Loki from a fantasy character into a science fiction character. Loki is no longer dealing with like Asgardian magic. He's dealing with timelines and multiverses and paradoxes and all that stuff, and it's like, no, make Loki the god of mischief. I also have to say, I wasn't a massive fan of Kate Herron's direction, because it seemed like to me in the material she seemed to have missed a lot of like key character beats. Like when Mobius gets pruned, I have to say Loki's reaction was incredibly underwhelming. Like instead of Loki trying to like fight off the TVA guards who are holding him back as Mobius gets pruned, it's like Mobius just gets pruned and Loki stands there looking all sad doing nothing. Like he didn't really put up much of a fight against the TVA, who were literally about to prune one of his only friends. I also have to say, from a visual standpoint, I didn't like how the cinematographer shot everything. Like visually it seemed like every scene was shot on like a 24mm prime lens, or at least a wide angle lens, because everyone looked really angular and it just wasn't very flattering for everyone. Oh, also, didn't the composer just completely rip off the Daredevil music? Like when Loki starts walking down the hall after Mobius has been pruned and he's all sad, and it's all like I'm like, that's the Daredevil thing. But yeah, that's pretty much how I feel about Loki at the minute. I just didn't really care for it. I didn't like it. It wasn't for me. But what did you guys think? Let me know in the comments down below. Like and subscribe and all the good stuff. Hit the notification bell down there. My social media links are down in the description, so if you give those a look and a follow, that'd be very much appreciated. And until we meet again, I'll see you guys next time.